Carl Jung reveals what happens when you stop being available, what happens when you stop picking up the phone every time it rings. What happens when you retreat from the noise, from the constant stream of demands, expectations, and invisible contracts you never agreed to? What happens when you are no longer available to the world in the way it has come to expect from your time, your emotional labor, your energy, or even your silence that once implied consent? Carl Jung, the legendary depth psychologist, would say that something profound begins to stir, not just in the relationships that surround you, but in the deepest chambers of the self. Because when you stop being available, you don't just disappear from the world, you reappear to yourself. We live in a culture of hyper-availability. We're expected to be reachable at all times, responsive to everyone, agreeable, cooperative, and endlessly present. Social media has turned our lives into open windows. Technology has made our attention a commodity. And slowly, quietly, we've allowed ourselves to become fragmented pieces of us scattered across platforms, relationships, roles, and responsibilities. We reply to messages instantly, but ignore the messages from our own psyche. We tend to others' emergencies while our own soul quietly withers. Jung warned us about this long ago. He spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society. It's not fake, but it's incomplete. It's the version of you as curated for the outer world. And the more available we are to that world, the more we suppress the inner world, the realm of the unconscious, the shadow, and the self.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But what happens when you start to pull back? When you say no? When you stop showing up in the way people expect? At first, there is resistance. People get uncomfortable. They question your sudden need for space. They may guilt you, accuse you of being selfish, aloof, or distant. But what they're really experiencing is the friction of their own unmet needs. And for perhaps the first time, you've returned that need back to them. You've stopped absorbing it. You've stopped being the container for everyone else's projections. And that's where the alchemy begins. That's when something ancient awakens. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming your true self, requires a withdrawal from the collective. Not forever, not in bitterness, but in order to hear the voice that's been drowned out by the noise, your own. The unconscious cannot speak in a crowded room. It whispers through dreams, symbols, synchronicities, and strange inner promptings. And these messages are missed when we are overly available, when we're too busy being everything to everyone. So, the first thing that happens when you stop being available is that you make space. Not just time on your calendar, but psychic space, spiritual space. And in that space, the self, the capital S self, the totality of who you are, can emerge. But this emergence is not always peaceful. Jung warned that the unconscious doesn't just contain light. It contains the shadow, the parts of us we've repressed, denied, or rejected to be accepted by others. These parts come forward when we retreat. They rise up in solitude. They confront us in silence. And this is why most people fear stepping back. They don't fear loneliness. They fear what might show up in the silence. They fear meeting themselves, unfiltered. Because when you stop being available to the world, you are forced to be available to yourself. And that is the beginning of transformation. Now let me ask you something. When was the last time you were truly alone, not just physically, but psychologically unavailable to others? No phone, no notifications, no obligations. They did just you and whatever surfaced from that silence. What did you feel? Relief? Fear? Stillness? Panic? That moment reveals so much. It shows you how comfortable or uncomfortable you are with the truth of who you are when no one's watching. And Jung would say that this confrontation is sacred. It's the doorway to the unconscious. It's the beginning of healing, and it cannot happen when you're constantly available. So, ironically, becoming unavailable is not selfish. It's spiritual. It's not avoidance. It's alignment. It's not about shutting people out. It's about inviting yourself in, because when you stop participating in the endless performance of modern life, you begin to live a life that is real, not curated, not optimized, not filtered, but authentic, alive, whole. And that wholeness has gravity. It draws people in not because you're accessible, but because you're real. Because you've stopped being a mirror for others and started becoming a light from within. The sacred power of withdrawal, why stepping back creates real connection. When we think of withdrawal, we often associate it with weakness, with running away, with detachment from life. But Carl Jung saw withdrawal not as an escape, but as a sacred act of self-preservation, an intentional turning inward, a necessary pause that allows something deeper to emerge. In a world obsessed with visibility, with being seen, being heard, and being relevant, stepping back feels almost like social suicide. But what if the opposite is true? What if the very act of becoming less visible to the world is what allows you to become more visible to yourself and ultimately more impactful to others? Jung taught that the psyche, like nature, has seasons. There are times for growth, for expression, for connection. But there are also times for retreat, reflection, and regeneration. A tree does not bloom all year. It loses its leaves. It goes inward. And in that sacred dormancy, it prepares for its next cycle of life. Yet we expect ourselves to be in perpetual bloom, always available, always productive, always giving. And when we fail to meet this impossible standard, we feel guilt. But what if the guilt of stepping back is not evidence of failure, but evidence of liberation? What if guilt is just the echo of cultural conditioning, trying to pull you back into a rhythm that was never yours to begin with? When you stop being available in the ways the world demands, you begin to discover the ways in which you were never truly connected to begin with. Because connection without depth is not intimacy, it's performance. It's maintenance, it's habit. And sometimes we don't even realize how shallow our relationships have become until we remove ourselves from them. Only then do we see who reaches out not just because they need something, but because they see something in you. Only then do we begin to filter out the noise from the signal, the real from the routine. Jung would say that withdrawal is not isolation, but individuation. It is the necessary separation from the collective so that you can discover your authentic essence, your archetype, your myth, your message. And from that place, you return to the world not as a fragmented persona, but as a whole being. And when you return in wholeness, your presence carries a weight, a gravity, a resonance that was never there before. You no longer offer yourself out of obligation. You offer yourself out of overflow. And people feel that. They feel the difference between someone who is available because they can't say no, and someone who is available because they've done the inner work to know when to say yes. So ask yourself, who are you when you're not performing? Who are you when you're not being liked, followed, validated, or needed? That version of you, the one that exists in the quiet, in the slow, in the sacred, is the one you must come home to if you ever want to experience true connection. Because the paradox is this: when you withdraw from shallow availability, you create space for deep availability. But when you say no to the world's constant demands, you say yes to your soul's quiet invitations. And here's where it becomes even more interesting. When you return, people begin to treat you differently. They sense the shift. They may not be able to name it, but they can feel it. There's a calm in your presence, a clarity in your speech, a boundary in your energy that wasn't there before. You become less reactive, more discerning, less entangled, more elevated. And that elevation doesn't disconnect you, it allows you to connect more honestly, more compassionately, and more powerfully than ever before. So maybe the most radical thing you can do in a world of constant noise is to go quiet. Maybe the most courageous thing you can do in a world of endless availability is to become sacredly unavailable, but not forever. Just long enough to remember who you are when no one is asking anything of you. Just long enough to return to the source. And from that source, everything changes, not because you forced the world to change, but because you changed your relationship to it. Jung's shadow principle, why absence triggers our deepest truths. There is a moment, often subtle but deeply unsettling, when you begin to withdraw and the world doesn't immediately notice. You stop replying to messages. You stop showing up in spaces where your presence was once expected. But you stop saying yes out of fear and obligation. And at first, there's silence. And then the shadows arrive. The internal ones. The ones that Carl Jung spent his life exploring, naming, and helping us understand. The shadow, as Jung described it, is everything within us we have not yet brought into the light, every disowned quality, every suppressed emotion, every part of ourselves we were told was unacceptable, unlovable, or too much. And it is precisely in our absence from others, and others' absence from us, that these hidden truths begin to surface. When we are constantly available, constantly distracted, the shadow remains dormant, unprovoked. Life becomes a series of surface-level interactions and mechanical routines that keep us just busy enough to avoid our inner world. But the moment we step back, the moment we remove ourselves from the performance of everyday life, the unconscious begins to speak. And it doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it roars. We start to feel old wounds we thought we buried. We remember moments of rejection, abandonment, betrayal. We question our worth, our identity, and even our sanity. And this is not a sign that something is going wrong. It's a sign that something real is finally being revealed. Jung believed that the shadow is not inherently evil. It's not the bad part of us. It's simply the part of us we have not yet integrated. It contains our deepest fears, yes, but also our deepest potential, our creativity, our passion, our authenticity. And when we stop being available, the shadow rises because it finally has room to breathe. It has space to move. It has your attention. And it demands to be seen, not so it can destroy you, but so it can free you. Because the truth is, we spend so much of our lives running from the parts of ourselves we don't understand, projecting them onto others, avoiding the discomfort of self-confrontation. But you cannot heal what you will not face. and you cannot face what you are too distracted to see. So consider this: what parts of you have you kept hidden just to stay available to others? What truths have you silenced just to remain likable, agreeable, or safe? What desires have you buried because they didn't fit the image you've been performing? When you remove yourself from the stage, the costume falls off, and what's left is raw, unfiltered truth. It's terrifying, but it's also sacred, because that is the beginning of real power, not the kind that dominates others, but the kind that integrates the self. And here's the paradox Jung understood so well: the more we suppress the shadow, the more it controls us from behind the scenes. It leaks into our relationships, our choices, our emotional reactivity. But when we bring it into consciousness, when we sit with it, name it, and listen to it, it loses its grip. We begin to reclaim the energy we once used to hide. And that energy becomes creativity. It becomes clarity. It becomes inner authority. And that authority is not loud. It doesn't need to be. It's the quiet confidence of someone who has met their darkness and did not run, who has withdrawn from the world not to escape it, but to understand their place in it. So what happens when you stop being available? You meet the parts of yourself that were only visible in your absence. You meet the truth behind the mask. You meet your own power, not as something to perform, but as something to embody. And in doing so, you become truly dangerous, not in the destructive sense, but in the liberating sense. Because people cannot manipulate someone who knows their shadow. The systems cannot control someone who has reclaimed their truth. Life cannot shake someone who has built a home within themselves. The return from withdrawal becoming the presence that transforms everything. There comes a point after the withdrawal, after the silence, after the deep confrontation with the self, that when something unexpected begins to happen, you return. But not as the person who left, but you return with new eyes, a new voice, and a new relationship to the world. After facing your shadow, after making peace with your absence, you emerge with something that can't be faked: presence. Not the kind of presence that demands attention, but the kind that commands respect simply by existing. Carl Jung understood this as individuation, the process of becoming whole, of integrating the fragmented parts of the psyche into a unified self. And once that process begins, your very existence becomes a mirror, a catalyst, a force. When you stop being available in the reactive, scattered, approval-seeking way and begin to live from a place of centered stillness, people feel it. They may not say it, but they sense it. You're no longer entangled in their projections. You no longer shrink to make others comfortable. You're not performing. You're not over-explaining. You're simply there, fully. And that kind of presence is rare. It disrupts. It awakens. It unsettles people who are still running from their own disowned selves. But to those who are ready, it heals, it invites, it inspires. Because you've done something most people are afraid to do. You've met yourself, and you didn't look away. And now, without effort, your boundaries are clear. You don't need to defend them, they're embedded in your energy. You don't need to justify your time, your silence, or your truth. It's self-evident. Because when you've spent time in the depths, you no longer settle for the superficial. You don't chase connection, you are connection. You don't try to be valuable, you know your value. And that knowing changes everything. So what does it mean, really, To stop being available, it means you've stopped outsourcing your worth. You've stopped reacting to every demand, every message, every pull on your energy. You've stopped scattering yourself into 1,000 pieces just to be liked, needed, or useful. And in doing so, you've become whole. And wholeness isn't loud, it's magnetic. It doesn't chase, it attracts. It doesn't argue, it embodies. Jung didn't ask us to withdraw forever. He asked us to go inward so that we could return not as fractured personas, but as integrated selves. And the world doesn't need more noise. It needs people who have done the inner work, who can stand still in a storm, who can speak truth without violence, who can love deeply without losing themselves. So ask yourself one final, soul-deep question. What would your life look like if you stopped being available to everything that diminishes you and became fully available only to what nourishes, elevates, and aligns with who you truly are? That's not retreat. That's revolution. And it begins the moment you decide, I am no longer available for anything less than the truth.